Last June, I became the pastor of Embrace United Methodist Church here in Lexington, Kentucky. So before I became the pastor of Embrace, Laura and I were working together full-time, and we were the founders and co-executive directors of Common Good, so we really got to set the schedule for how Common Good was going to operate. And one thing we did early on was that we have an after-school program and we have a summer program that meets. And so we have programming year-round, but it's Monday through Thursday and we don't have program on Fridays. And there's a few reasons for that, but one of the reasons is because we want to encourage the staff and ourselves to take a break on Fridays. And so when I became the pastor of Embrace, we were no longer working together full-time, and so I knew it was going to be important for me to continue to take Friday as a Sabbath. And so I remember a conversation I had early on with the leadership of the church, and I just told them, I said, this is a day that Laura and I take together as a Sabbath, and so I'd really like to have Fridays off.
We started keeping the Sabbath about 6 years ago, and I don't know at first if it was really intentional and we set out to say, hey, we're going to keep the Sabbath once a week. But I think we started to notice after about 2 years of being in ministry here that we were getting tired, that we were struggling to prioritize time with God, time alone, and time with each other. And so I think it just kind of started coming out of we need a break. And then we started realizing when we were taking that one day a week that in fact it was Sabbath and that it was important to keep and that God had actually commanded us to do that. And so it became, first started a little bit out of necessity, and then it really became a commitment that we wanted to do together.
My dad is a pastor, and so I grew up in church, and so I knew knew early on that Sundays are not really a day that I can typically take off, and that's when most people, I guess, would call their Sabbath. And so my dad, when I was in high school, I think he started keeping a Sabbath on a regular basis, and it wasn't necessarily something we did as a family, but he was intentional about taking time off during the week. When I started working as a youth pastor at the church, Sundays were a work day for me as well, and so I wasn't able to take that day off. Or pretty early on in that job, I started taking a Sabbath on Fridays. There's this verse that's been stirring in my heart and in my mind lately, and it's Psalm 46:10, and it says to be still and know that I am God. And I think the idea of being still is more than just physically being still. It's more than just stopping. It's a lot about trying to slow your mind down and trust God, I think, is part of that too. Because often I get confused about who God is, and sometimes I think I'm God, and I think that I'm the one responsible to make everything happen, that all the burden rests on my shoulders. But when I can truly slow down and be still, it reminds me that God is God, and that God's the one in control, and I can trust Him. And so that really does help me to meditate and think on that verse a lot, because I need to be still and remind myself that it's not on me, it's ultimately on Him.
I've really had to figure out how to be a person that does things, but also one that cultivates my spiritual life. And I really feel like I have to be connected to the vine to do the work that God has called me to do. And so the Sabbath has been really an important part of that, because each week I have one day I set aside that calls me back to rest and calls me back to God. And I think the Sabbath really combats the God complex that we all have, that we're the one who keeps making the world work. We're the one who keeps our neighborhood on track, or that kid doing the right thing, or that family on target. God's the one doing it. He calls us to work alongside Him, but it reminds me when we take a break that it's not ultimately about me or the work that I'm doing, it's about God.
I read a quote recently by Matthew Sleeth, and it said that Sabbath helps us transition from human doings to human beings. And that meant a lot to me, because I'm like Laura too. Often I define myself by what I do, and I think most people do. I mean, that's kind of how we define who we are, is by our successes and by our failures. And so it's kind of hard to live that way, because when things are going well, then you may feel good, but when you maybe have some difficult times in ministry, then you don't feel so good about yourself anymore. And I think Sabbath reminds me that it's more important about who we are, that we are children of God. There's this scene in the Gospel of Mark when the disciples are on a boat with Jesus and this crazy storm blows in, and the disciples thought that they were going to die, and this had to have been a pretty crazy storm, because The disciples, many of them were experienced fishermen, and even experienced fishermen thought they were going to die. So this was probably a pretty intense storm. And while this storm's going on, Jesus is like doing this really crazy thing. He's like sleeping in the back of the boat, and then the disciples come and wake him up, and they're like, Jesus, what are you doing? Come on, help us out. Like, we're all going to die here. And then Jesus rebuked the wind and the waves, and then he rebukes the disciples for their lack of faith and trust in him. And that story's been important to me because often life can feel like you're just in the midst of this crazy storm and all this stuff's caving in around you, and it's just important for me to be reminded that Jesus is with me, and that he's with me in that boat, and that I can trust him. And I think Jesus was able to sleep in the boat because he had such a connection with the Father, that he just knew that he was taken care of and that he would be provided for. And I think that's a model for how we need to live our lives, and we need to trust God, and we need to trust that God will provide for us. And Sabbath just has a way of reminding me of that, because it's just a time where we stop doing, we stop striving, we stop trying to do it all by ourselves, and we just stop and say, we're going to trust you, God, and we're going to trust you to give us what we need.